I'm Patrick Tomlin, Assistant Dean and Director of Learning Environments at the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. I'm joined by Jonathan Bradley, Head of Studios and Innovative Technologies Coordinator. And our presentation, Navigating Virtually Uncharted Waters, concerns itself with a series of questions that emerged as a result of creating services and carving out physical spaces in the library focused on emerging technologies, specifically VR and AR, and the creation of the Virtual Environment Studio. Questions like, what is the role of emerging technologies in the library? And how might we leverage emerging technologies like VR to enhance the student learning experience and embed the library within those experiences? Even more fundamentally, how does the introduction of such services impact the way that libraries and IT work together? How does it enhance or perhaps disrupt existing workflows and processes? And then finally, how do we measure and assess the success of the creation of such services and their impact on student learning?
At the University Libraries of Virginia Tech, we have a series of studios that we collectively refer to as the Studios Network. In these studios, we emphasize emerging technologies and media production. And we have a philosophy that sort of surrounds the idea of play as a form of learning. In addition to taking on academic projects, students are allowed to sort of experiment, try things out. And the space ultimately acts as an experiential learning space for students and community patrons. Among the studios that exist in the Studios Network is the Virtual Environment Studio, which is our virtual reality, augmented reality space that exists in the building. Facilitates research projects, independent projects, game design, all these sorts of things for virtual reality and augmented reality. The space was a bit of a challenge to put together for many reasons that we're going to talk about here, but it's ultimately been a very rewarding service that we offer out.
The Virtual Environment Studio opened in the fall of 2017. So about 3 years ago. It was preceded by the creation of two prior studios, the 3D Design Studio, which focused on the emerging technology of 3D printing and additive manufacturing, and the Fusion Studio, which served as an incubator-like space for groups of undergraduate researchers involved in projects and development outside of courses. The underlying philosophy of the Studios Network and Virtual Environment Studio was to lower the barriers to access to emerging technology like 3D printing and VR and AR, but also to foster in the process of exposing students, faculty, and researchers to such technologies to foster the skills needed to think and use those technologies critically. So prototyping skills, collaboration skills, and so forth. Hundreds of students, faculty, researchers have used the Virtual Environment Studio since it's opened on a wide range of projects. Our sort of ideal student is one who has no prior experience with the technology, but who is inspired and creative and curious enough about it to not only explore it, tinker with it, but to, through consultation and the expertise of studio managers and the expertise that the students themselves gain by engaging in the technology, will move on to higher level projects. But I would say that the common denominator of all of the activity that has gone on in the Virtual Environment Studio over the past 3 years, from dropping in to play a game during a break from exams to grant-funded research and development projects is the sheer range and diversity of individual users' needs and the impact that has had on the way in which we work with and through IT to meet those needs.
One of the first challenges that you're going to run into if you start trying to design an emerging technology space is the fact that when you go to deal with your IT, there's going to be a difficulty when it comes to working what you want to do into their existing support structures. Because in many cases, the technology that you're going to be dealing with doesn't have an existing support structure, not just at your particular institution, but anywhere, really. It just hasn't been around long enough for that to happen. And so there's a lot of communication that needs to happen on the front end between you and your IT department concerning that support structure. You really need to be understanding that things that are outside of their support structure pose a difficulty for them. And you really want to communicate that you're going to take the lead on this technology and incorporating it and making sure that it's secure, safe, and sort of does what it can do to meet any existing safety protocols that they do have in place. As an example of one of the sorts of challenges that can come up, when we were trying to build out this space for the Virtual Environment Studio, if you've ever dealt with virtual reality, you'll know that most virtual reality experiences are built, developed within game development engines released by game companies, and their distribution methods are also via game distribution systems. That is not necessarily how your central IT departments intends to get software or are used to getting software in the past. When we were first trying to obtain some software for the space, I had to call the head of software licensing and procurement for Virginia Tech and actually talk to them about Valve, the company that runs Steam and releases many of the VR experiences that we were wanting to sort of add as examples for the space. And trying to talk to them about their needs from a legal standpoint and a licensing standpoint and the difficulties that they were likely to face related to Valve's support structure. They're a flat company. They're in terms of not having a hierarchy. These things all pose challenges, and at the beginning it's very easy for one of these IT groups to just sort of write this off as not worth their time or just dismiss it and say no, because at the core of this, there's a saying in IT that 80% of the users take up 20% of your time. I've heard it said a few different ways, but that's one of the ways. If you're going to be dealing with emerging technologies and you want to have a good working relationship with your IT, you need to understand that you are that 20%. You are going to probably take up more of their time. They're going to view you as that 20%, whether you end up being that or not. And so you need to do your part to take as much of that burden away from them as possible. So that leads into the question of, well, what should I take on? What can I take on? This is a good place to sit down with your IT people and have a conversation. Explain to them what the needs of your service are. Sort of what is your bare minimum viable product that you're going to be working for? How does this service need to function? Find out what they can do for you, what they're comfortable doing for you. So the virtual reality headsets that we have in the space, I do most of the maintenance related to those. The computer, though, because it's just sort of a traditional computer, is mostly maintained by our IT department. And we were able to work out, so here's a structure we need. This is what I need from you in terms of that structure and to be able to do with the computer. And this is what patrons will ultimately be able to need to do from the computer. And work out a system in which we can get that and they can meet some of their security standards that they're looking at needing. Ultimately, working this way with them led to a compromise that was beneficial for both of us. They didn't have to worry so much about the headsets, which are ostensibly peripherals, and at the same time, when it came time for them to do their security reports, they were able to say, yes, this computer meets our security protocols. The more you're able to make these sorts of compromises with your IT department, the better off you'll ultimately be. they'll be more likely to want to help you in the future, and when you propose new projects or you find a new piece of emerging technology that you want to incorporate, they'll have more confidence that the role you'll take will be one in which you both sort of support each other and you take what their needs are in consideration when you're both purchasing, obtaining, and designing service models, while still allowing you the freedom to try these new cutting-edge technologies that people have sort of barely started to deal with at that point in time. Another thing that you might want to consider is helping train them. So a lot of the people who work in your IT department probably work in your IT department because they like technology. They like new things, and in many of these cases, they may be sort of pigeonholed, that the expectations, the things their supervisor are looking for, are specifically gearing them towards spending their time on a certain thing. And it might be Windows maintenance or Mac OS maintenance or something along those lines. And so while they may be interested in the technology that you're hoping to bring into the spaces, they may not have enough motivation to pursue learning anything about those technologies themselves. And this might be coming internally, but it also might be coming externally from a supervisor or just from the rules that they have to follow and the amount of time they have at work. So your willingness to help them learn technologies could go a long way, granted if they show the interest in doing that to begin with. The next topic we're going to be dealing with is the value of emerging technologies and pursuing them and related services at whatever organization you have.
We know that the original design of libraries as glorified warehouses for books and print manuscripts, pleasantly lit reading rooms and shushing librarians, no longer effectively meets the needs of students and researchers on campus. And the creation of the studios, after identifying that basic need of lowering the barrier to entry to these technologies, the creation of these studios allowed us to interact with students and campus partners in a way that we had not previously, particularly around an adaptive service model. In other words, that the space and the services embedded in them are flexible enough to accommodate a wide range of needs and use cases. So in any given week, the virtual environment studio may function as a sandbox for project experimentation and development. Again, a space in which to simply explore, tinker with no strings attached. No need for prior experience or a departmental affiliation or even a specific project in or outside of a course to work on. And then a space for consultations, individual, group, class consultations with studio managers who have developed expertise around those technologies. The adaptive service model is meant to address the needs of our users at the point of need, just in time, right? So it is the task at hand, not the technology, that really defines the space and how we have created services around the emerging technologies of VR and AR. The final thing that I want to talk about in the context of the challenges and opportunities associated with emerging technologies within the library is advocacy. If you've ever put on an Oculus headset, say, you probably remember that first moment sliding into this new virtual world and that sense of defamiliarization, disorientation. We've had users in the virtual environment studio who have stumbled in the physical space as they attempt to adjust to inhabiting a Van Gogh painting, right? And attempting to sit down on a chair in a Parisian cafe or to sit down on the artist's bed only to find that it does not, in fact, exist in the real world. This sense of disorientation is perhaps a fitting metaphor for the place of emerging technologies currently in the library. there's this alignment or correlation between these two worlds that at the same time reflects the core mission or values of the academic library, which is to provide access to the tools of knowledge creation and creativity and innovation and invention. At the same time, it is important to plan and to better understand one's role as an advocate on campus. When we created the 3D Design Studio and the Virtual Environment Studio, the first thing that we attempted to do was to better understand our users and to back that understanding up with data, whether through focus groups or environmental scans or other means of collecting data. We quickly realized that in the case of 3D printing and VR, AR, that students did not have a place to go if they simply wanted to explore the technology with low stakes, to work independently of a class or outside of a departmentally affiliated space for those technologies. So we quickly honed in on the need to, again, lower the barrier to access to these tools. It's also important to align the implementation of these services with the broader strategic priorities and initiatives of your institution or your library. In our case, there was an emphasis on experiential, hands-on learning that we wanted to intersect with, reinforce, and establish a reputation and an expertise for within the library around these emerging technologies. And then finally, it's important to have grassroots support. As we were building up these services, it was critical to reach out to students and faculty to provide information about the space and the way in which we were framing it so that they could see themselves reflected in its mission. Engaging in these sort of activities allowed us to adopt this adaptive service mindset and to really not only understand our users in a different and I think more effective fashion, but to engage them in spaces that moved pretty completely away from the sort of transactional, static configured, lab-like environments that had previously been in the library.
So I'm going to tell you about two stories of various ways that emerging technologies has built partnerships and or helped with our interaction with students. So the first is a story about a student who came into the Virtual Environment Studio developing a project for a class, and it was related to sleep paralysis. And this falls into a category of VR experiences that I call empathetic VR experiences. The goal is to have someone sort of walk in another person's shoes. But this student was trying to express something that they had felt and they had dealt with all of their lives, and that they had trouble convincing other people was a serious concern. And ultimately, this student was able to come in, use our spaces, had multiple consultations with me, and built this really amazing little experience. And then was able to come in and sort of have a news story done about them and their work that we arranged for them. And ultimately, this is the sort of stuff that students take away, put on their resumes, and talk about as they try to get jobs in the field. And so, you know, on one hand, you seem like you're just offering a technology to people, but it really does help them direct their careers and direct them into what they want to do by just having access. And sometimes we underestimate how important that is. And that's been one of our sort of philosophical goals in the Studios Network since the very beginning, is that lower barrier to access. Can we remove it completely? If we can, that's great, and that's the ultimate goal. The other thing that's really great about pursuing some of these emerging technologies and spaces and making them available to your various patrons is it's experiential learning. If done correctly, you are essentially giving people the tools they need to teach themselves things that they may not learn specifically in their classes. And even if they were going to learn if this set of students might learn this technology, this other set who can use your spaces can also learn it, and they may not be taught in it. So an example of this might be our 3D design studio, students coming in interested in 3D printing, they print a few toys, they leave, seems like not a big deal. What did they learn from that? But they learned about how 3D printing works and what it's capable of. Later they come back, they've designed their own models that are utilitarian in purpose. They design these things to work around their dorm. It ultimately saved them a bunch of money, and their designs worked better than the things they could have gone out in the store and bought. So it's that sort of hands-on, I want to know what this thing's about. And I have a common saying that we use in our studios network a lot, and that is, most people don't know what they want to do with a technology until they've had time to play with it. The core of this idea is it's very rare for someone to sit down, see some new emerging technology depicted on the television, and say, oh yeah, I have a research project for that. No, they're just I don't even know what that is. Maybe I got some idea from what I've heard, but it's when people sit down and they play with it and can sort of see all it's capable of that these ideas start coming out. The third topic we have for you is related to assessment. How to assess emerging technologies and whether or not they're successful. One of the first things that you need to find out, and this might be a conversation with your supervisor, whoever's asking you for this assessment data, is what do you want to know? What do we want to know about this technology? There's a tendency in assessment to just gather data, gather information, collect it up. But there's no point in gathering data if it's not going to be used for anything. Who's asking for an assessment data? Who needs this information? Is it your provost? Is it someone else? Is it a vice president? Is it, who wants this information from you? And ultimately, what are their goals in asking for it? Are they trying to decide whether to fund you? Are they trying to decide how they're going to market this? Are they trying to decide whether it's a success? And sometimes these things are tied together, but it's good to have a clear picture of just what it is you're trying to tell, because data is intended to tell a story. And if you don't know what story you're trying to tell, it becomes difficult. So one of the first challenges you're going to run into, quantitative, qualitative data. Two different things. One of them, when it comes to technology, can be fairly easy to collect, and that's quantitative data. Certain things like usage, oftentimes, depending on your service model, can be pretty easy to track. We had 52 bookings over the last 2 months or whatever for a given space, and boom, you've got a number, you've got a certain number of patrons. User feedback is sort of your next level. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about some of the challenges we've faced when it comes to user feedback. So when we first opened our first studio, we were like, well, we want feedback from people. What kind of experience did they have? And so we thought, we could put a form in the space, but we don't think anybody will fill it out. People want to fill things out on their own time. Let's ask 3 questions. We'll have it be in the email that they get following your print is ready, and they come pick it up. So they got an email, they can fill it out whenever they want, and it's 3 items, 3 questions, should be super quick. In years of running that space, I think we got 2 responses to that form. And it was just, we underestimated how much of a barrier 3 questions that you got to fill out on your own time was. And so we started, instead of being like, well, nobody wants to tell us how we're doing, so we must be doing fine, or they don't have any complaints or something like that, we decided, well, we need to rethink this. Can we go lower barrier to entry? It's sort of been our philosophy this whole time, is if it's lower barrier to entry to technology, it should also be lowest barrier to entry for feedback. And so I actually created these little kiosks. They're just little touch screens. And it's just a smiley face, frowny face. How'd do? Yes or no? And so somebody says, hey, I liked what I did. I'm going to punch this smiley face. Or I didn't like what happened. I'm going to hit the frowny face. Within a week of that system being up, we had more feedback than we'd gotten in years of running this other system with a form. So in addition to user feedback, some of the other stuff that we often use for assessment is projects that come out of this, and grants, things that we take on at a deeper level. We also get course invites related to this, which is a thing we count in our assessment. How many times are we asked to come do a presentation, talk about a topic, do a workshop for someone's specific class on campus. Another common way that we assess this is consultations. We get students, faculty, staff, community partners who are working on a project. Maybe they have a little bit of experience with this, but they're running into roadblocks, and they come to us because we have this forward-facing service. We have this knowledge about this technology, and they ask us, can you help me with my project? You know, I'm really just stuck here. Or I'm getting started, but I don't know what I should choose. What should I purchase? You own a lot of this technology. Can you give me some advice? All of these are also ways that we support, and they're really also a good way to talk about the impact you have on money saved, because if someone comes and they have a grant and they buy a piece of technology because it's what they thought they needed and it's wrong, and then they have to buy something else, that's money wasted. But if they come talk to you ahead of time and make sure they get what they need for their specific purposes, or better yet, they're able to actually use your technology for their project if it's not so demanding, then they don't even have to buy something themselves, and you've ultimately saved some money on your campus. I want to thank everyone for coming out and attending our presentation. If you have any questions for me, you can contact me at bradley1@vt.edu. Appreciate it. Thank you.